Good morning and welcome to the Morning Scoop for Monday, May 17th. This is your daily Buckeye Fix. I'm Tom Orr. The Minnesota game is in 108 days, the game against Michigan in 194 days. Our season preview series continues today with the Iowa Hawkeyes. My guest today is Chad Leistikow. He is a sports columnist with the Des Moines Register and Iowa City Press Citizen. Chad, first of all, thank you for putting your pronunciation of your last name in your Twitter bio, and thank you also for joining me.
Yeah, happy to make my debut here on the Buckeye Scoop podcast. And like my mom always says, that my last name rhymes with likes to go. So that's another way I like to tell people. So appreciate you pronouncing it correctly.
If you put it in your Twitter bio, it's the least I can do.
Yes, sir.
In the interest of full disclosure here, the Hawkeyes surprised me a little bit last season because they had a couple close losses to start the year and then ran off 6 straight wins before their Champions Week matchup against Michigan and the Music City Bowl against Missouri both got canceled. That seemed by and large like a really Kirk Ferentz type Iowa season. But, after some of the turmoil of last offseason with the dismissal of strength coach Chris Doyle, I was thinking like maybe this is more of like an up and down year or a year where like you didn't need an excuse to kind of mail it in last year. Like that seemed very much like a year where it's like, yeah, they'll just kind of fold the tents and see you in 2021. So what was it that actually held things together last season and allowed Ferentz to seemingly still be in a pretty solid position with his job when it looked like he might be on maybe some more shaky footing at one point?
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite a year, and we're almost up on a year now since it was about 60 former players, expressed negative experiences in the program, from racial disparities to discrimination to just bullying. So that was a tough month in June for Kirk Ferentz and the program. And obviously, it was just a complicated situation where you hear a lot of stories and you want to know, you try to give everyone their voice and let it all play out. So it was, I would say, overall, it was impressive in the long run that Iowa got through it like they did, but it was not like it was smooth sailing. I mean, you mentioned a slow start to the season. They get off to an 0-2 start, and then a few guys are in the transfer portal, all black guys. So it's like, okay, are the wheels starting to come off here? And then the next week they come out, they suspend Amir Smith-Marset after an OWI. So that added to kind of the, okay, what is going on here? And after they blew a big lead against Northwestern. I mean, it just seemed like things were crumbling. Then they come out the next week and blow out Michigan State at home. I mean, like really blow them out. I think that was the week after they beat Michigan. And after that, it was they won every game. In fact, they beat Penn State by 20. They beat rival Wisconsin by 21. The only game that was really close the rest of the way was Nebraska, and that was a 6-point game. But how did they hold it together? They have. Here's what I'll say: they have pointed to that they believed in their culture. They've changed some things. They've given a lot more voice to black players on the team, just in terms of leadership, in terms of hairstyles, music in the building. I mean, they've made, surface changes, but deeper changes too. And they knelt for the anthem. I mean, I think about 27, 28 guys were allowed to kneel for the anthem, and that had never been allowed by Kirk Ferentz before. So, I mean, I think that those types of changes made a difference. And you've seen it play out in terms of the fun they had on the field. You think of Iowa as a real robotic type business-like team. You saw a little bit more of that. I'm not going to say they're, Miami Hurricanes or anything yet, but they're having a little bit more fun out there, and you feel like you see things moving in the right direction. And I'll close out with this very long-winded answer. We talked to Kelvin Bell, who's a black defensive line coach for the Hawkeyes, who's very outspoken on racial injustices, and he was very emphatic in terms of ways he's grown also, but also how proud he is of how far this program has come in the last year. So I think that speaks volumes. At least from what we can tell, things are on the right track in that department. But as Kirk Ferentz says, there's still more work to do, more to learn. It's not a quick fix, but I think overall there's a feeling that things are on the right track.
So where do things stand right now? There was a pending lawsuit with former players. Where do things stand right now with that case against the school?
Yeah, great question. That in fact, there was just some news in the last week on that. 13 black former players had sued the university, Kirk Ferentz, Brian Ferentz, Chris Doyle, for $20 million. They wanted Gary Barta fired, Kirk Ferentz fired, plus some other considerations in terms of how the athletic department would be structured. I mean, a lot of major demands. Kirk Ferentz has, in last week's ruling in the Southern Court, U.S. District Court in Southern Iowa, was removed as a defendant. So he is no longer legally, exposed in this lawsuit. There's only 2 actual names left in the lawsuit. 6 of the 8 counts have been dismissed, which is good news on the university side of things. But 2 of the 8 have moved forward, which is good for the former players. A racially hostile environment is count 1. That is still alive. And that is more against the university as a whole as a defendant. And then civil rights discrimination, count 4, is also alive against 2 individuals. And their names are Chris Doyle, the strength coach who was removed a week after all this kind of blew up last summer, and Brian Ferentz, the current offensive coordinator whose role has never changed. So it's an interesting dynamic there that Kirk Ferentz is off the legal hook, so to speak, but his son is kind of the only current figure on the staff that's still part of this lawsuit, which now we'll see what happens. Does it go to a settlement? They're supposed to set a trial date, have a date scheduled late this month to set a date. So that's kind of where things stand. So it's not over yet. But both players and university, I think, made some claimed victory last week with the ruling from the court.
So that's still kind of hanging over the program right now a little bit, and they just wrapped up their spring practice with their spring game on May 1st. They do have a luxury that not everyone in the league does this year, which is a reliable returning starter at quarterback. Spencer Petras was, solid but not spectacular last year. I think it was 9 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, which is, that's fine. That feels like an Iowa quarterback kind of line to me. Did he look like he might be able to take that next step during the spring? Like he might be able to go from kind of like solid to like pretty darn good?
Very, very good question, because that has actually been probably the most discussed thing of spring ball, is that there were a lot of fans, and I would say even media, that were not, were willing to point out the inconsistencies of Spencer Petras last year, and just wondering what was behind him, because we didn't know, because we didn't see a spring ball, we didn't see August camp. There were a couple freshmen behind him, Alex Padilla and Deuce Hogan. And so fans wanted to know, like, hey, is there anyone better than this? And, Petras did get it together. He won his last 6 games. He was still kind of inconsistent during that time. A lot of overthrows, really had a rough start against Illinois where they got in a 14-0 hole, and he just looked terrible. And then all of a sudden he turned it around and they scored 35 straight. So that was kind of the story of the season for Petras. And what I would say is I don't have confidence in that position right now as far as whether he can take Iowa to a Big Ten West title. I don't know. From what I saw in the spring, it was very inconsistent. I thought Alex Padilla was still a step behind him, but showed some pretty good accuracy and zip on the ball. So I think he's the clear number 2. But to me, and I know we'll get to other areas of this team, Iowa has a lot of really solid positions in place all around the team. Back end on the defense, offensive line, running back, even receiver should be pretty good. Tight end, they've got an NFL guy there. But do they have the quarterback? That we don't know. And they're going to be tested right out of the gate, because they play Indiana week 1 and Iowa State in Ames week 2. Those are 2 defending top 10, top 15 teams. So I don't know if you can really take Petras out of the starting role. I think he's probably your starter week 1 and see what happens.
Well, we were talking right before we hit record, and I said I feel like every year the Iowa season preview is the same. It's like, oh, they're going to be really good in the trenches on both sides of the ball, and the quarterbacks may be okay, and they're going to try and win a bunch of games like 28-24, 24-21, and it feels like that might kind of be what we're looking at again this year. It looks like, they lost three. You mentioned they lost three guys, but including both tackles off that offensive line. Are they going to be able to just kind of do the Iowa thing where they snap their fingers and all of a sudden have like another really good above average Big Ten offensive line again this year?
I do think the interior offensive line should be a major strength. They've probably got the best center in college football in Tyler Linderbaum. He was a Remington finalist last year. And then they've got a couple other interior linemen, Kyler Schott, who's very highly graded on PFF. And then a ton of other guys. Cody Entz, they really love him. He might actually flex out to right tackle just because they have so many good guards. But the question is, they did lose two starting tackles. Alaric Jackson, 4-year starter, left tackle, gone to the NFL. Last year, they kind of had a rotation of tackles on the right side, replacing Tristan Wirfs, now Super Bowl champion, with the Tampa Bay Bucks as a rookie. So, and Mark Kallenberger, the guy who kind of won that job or was first in that job, decided to transition out of football. That he didn't want to use his fifth-year senior year. So they're replacing two tackles there. That'll be a question, but I do think overall this should be a really good offensive line. They've really recruited well at that position the last couple of years, so they should be able to figure that out.
The controversy around the program last year, I think my assumption was, hey, it's going to hurt them on the field and it's going to hurt them in recruiting. And it didn't appear to hurt them on the field all that much. And it didn't seem to hurt them in recruiting either. They brought in a top 25 class, including a pair of 4-star athletes, Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce. They were both true freshmen this spring, early enrollees. Sounds like they were in the rotation a lot already this spring. Are those guys they're looking at as potential difference makers for the fall? And if not, who is Petras going to be thrown to?
Yeah, I think a great question. And yeah, those two guys you mentioned, Iowa doesn't usually get good receiver recruits at all. Keegan Johnson, I think, is a game changer. He was already working as a true freshman, early enrollee, in a room of 14 receivers. He was already working in their top three by the ninth spring practice, the open one we got to see. And then he was in that same role in the final spring game in their 15th practice. So he's 6'1", about 190. Really, his older brother's Cade Johnson, who should have been drafted probably at South Dakota State. But anyway, Nebraska legacy guy. So it was just a big get for Iowa. Yeah, he will be part of the plans, but their top receiver coming into the season will be Tyrone Tracy Jr. He's a fourth-year player out of Indianapolis. Really kind of exploded on the scene a couple of years ago in a backup role when Brandon Smith was hurt. But Iowa really leaned on two tight end personnel last year with Sam Laporta, Sean Byer, and their two senior receivers in Brandon Smith and Amir Smith-Marset. Those two receivers are gone. So you didn't see as much of Tracy last year, but he's probably the number one guy. They should be pretty good at receiver. But they need kind of that big X receiver. They kind of lack that big downfield threat. We don't know about that yet. So I would say you're going to see a lot of more underneath passing from Iowa this year. But hopefully for them, yards after the catch.
Now I can just hear right now our audience go, hey, ask about Luke Lachey. Ask about Luke Lachey. He is a Columbus kid. He is the son of former Ohio State All-American and current Ohio State radio broadcaster Jim Lachey. He is a tight end who went to Iowa. Has he started making any kind of an impact yet with the Hawkeyes? Yeah,
actually he has. And he's probably the front runner to be their number 2 tight end, which at Iowa is basically a starting position because they go 2 tight end personnel so much. Now that said, he's still making kind of young guy mistakes. The first open practice of 2 that we saw, I think he might have had, unofficially had 5 catches in the 11-on-11. So that's pretty, that's saying something from an Iowa passing game when you're questioning the quarterback play. So he looked pretty good in that role. He has been helped, I would say, by the fact that Iowa had the other top tight ends. One had a legal scrape kind of midway through camp, and so he was out for some time. And then another kid's been highly recruited kid that chose Iowa over LSU, Elijah Yelverton. He's been out with some injuries. So Lachey, I would say, kind of maybe got that number 2 role by default. I mean, not for sure, but but it looked like he kind of took the job and ran with it. So I think we will see him on the field this year as a redshirt freshman.
Well, on the other side of the ball, again, as I said earlier, Iowa always just seems to have a pretty good defensive line that helps them control the line of scrimmage. They lost Chauncey Golston and Davion Nixon to the NFL, but it sounded like this spring things were looking like, they might be okay up front again this year.
Yeah, they've got one proven defensive end, I would say, in Zach Van Valkenburg. He actually returned for a 6th year. That was a huge boost for the program. He was second team All Big Ten a year ago. I think more on the stats, probably than like the NFL intangibles, but he was pretty dominant in spring practice. So I think he's taken that next step. He's actually a 3rd year grad transfer, so, only in today's college football. But he's probably the leader of that group. They've just got a bunch of young guys and so many of them were hurt in the spring, so it's hard to really say they're going to get there on the D-line. That to me is their biggest question mark. So we don't know for sure. I would say they still maybe want to look at the portal for somebody at D tackle. That might be their at least their youngest position, maybe biggest position of question. But if you look behind them, the back 7 should be really, really good. All 5 defensive backs come back in that 4-2-5. They're all back, and they added an NFL guy and a transfer, Xavier Williams from UNI. He's got elite athleticism. I mean, just like insane vertical jump. He's an NFL prospect, so they're going to find a spot for him back there. And then they're 2 or 3 main linebackers. I'll mention 3 because they love all 3. Jack Campbell, Seth Benson, a linebacker. Campbell is a name you're going to hear a lot about. He had mono for the first 3 weeks last year, so he didn't play, and so he only played 5 games last year. But he's going to be a really dynamic player in the Big Ten at weak side linebacker. And then Justin Jacobs, I don't know if Ohio fans are familiar with him, but he came down to Iowa and Ohio State in the recruiting process, and he has kind of taken that step. Kirk Ferentz said from good-looking prospect to really good-looking player. So he will be in that linebacker mix as well for the Hawkeyes when they go 4-3 for sure as the outside linebacker, but he still could get some reps at inside linebacker as well. So linebackers good, defensive backs good, D-line question.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier the schedule is a little dicey because there are not many or maybe any definite losses on there, but they open with Indiana, they go to Iowa State. They have a couple solid group of 5 teams, Kent State and Colorado State after that. Home games later in the season are Penn State, Purdue, Minnesota, Illinois. They're on the road against Maryland, Wisconsin, Northwestern, Nebraska. I was looking through and I was kind of figuring out, penciling in definite wins, definite losses. And I came up with 4 or 5 pretty likely wins and then 7 potential toss-up games where it's it's 60-40 one way or the other. So how do you see things shaking out for Iowa this fall?
Yeah, that's a really great question because you don't know how these other teams are going to respond from last year and how much teams were affected a year ago by COVID and how much to take out of that. I guess just as I look at this Iowa schedule, there's no Ohio State on here. I don't know how good Michigan was going to be, but they're not on here either. So in a sense, this is kind of one of those breather years on the crossover front for the Hawkeyes. They get Indiana and Maryland as their kind of 2 randoms, and then Penn State is in the last year of being their crossover partner. So that's, I would say, a pretty decent crossover schedule. 2 of those are at home. Indiana's the opener, though, like you said, and that's going to be tricky. I do think Indiana's going to take a step back this year, and I think Iowa's going to be in a pretty good position, especially with that home crowd in the opener. So I like their chances there. But that second game at Iowa State, I mean, that really might be the toughest game on the schedule. I mean, Iowa State's bringing everybody back from a team that won the Fiesta Bowl, and they are just licking their chops at Iowa. They haven't beaten Iowa since 2014. I mean, it's such a fierce rivalry here. I don't want to compare it. Nothing compares to Ohio State, Michigan. But if there was a top rival for Iowa, like there is for Ohio State, this is the one. and it's probably been like the Ohio State Michigan relationship of late, where Iowa has kind of owned the rivalry, even when Michigan looks good, or when Iowa State looks good some years. And this is the year Iowa State wants to get back, so that'll be tough. But yeah, I don't know how good Penn State's going to be yet. At Wisconsin, at Northwestern, probably defines the season for Iowa. Those are two teams that historically gives them trouble. They've got them October 30th, November 6th. So that's both those coaches always seem to have Iowa's number. They know how to play them. So that'll be tricky. Every year it seems like Iowa, I would say, ends up second in the Big Ten West. Something happens. Some team emerges, like a couple years ago with Northwestern. They just go on this tear. So Iowa hasn't been back to the Big Ten title game since 15. That 15 season when Iowa went 12-0. It'd be fun if we were both covering the Big Ten title game in Indy this year and Iowa actually played Ohio State again. It's been a long time.
I'm ready to watch someone other than Wisconsin and Northwestern there. It seems like every year it's Wisconsin or Northwestern on the other sideline. So I'm ready to watch a different game. Before I let you go, I did want to ask one last quick recruiting question. With you've mentioned Matt Campbell having Iowa State at the highest point in program history. So you would sort of expect like, oh, well, they must certainly be dominating in Iowa in recruiting. And that really hasn't been the case. Why is that? What has allowed Iowa to kind of still be the top dog in state in terms of recruiting?
Yeah, it's I don't know how. I guess I would assume it's similar in the state of Ohio, where like every kid in Ohio probably like wants to go to Ohio State. I mean, in general, and I would say, just in my opinion, for the most part, that is still kind of the prevalent, I guess, dynamic in the state of Iowa. Now, closer to Ames, you're going to have a lot more Cyclone concentration, and here where I live in the Des Moines area, it's probably closer to 50-50. But in general, the statewide. Yeah, most of these kids grew up Hawkeye fans, and their parents are Hawkeye fans, and their grandparents are Hawkeye fans, and so that tie is kind of tough to break. And I will say, Iowa State has gotten a couple of in-state commitments. I think from a couple linebackers in this last couple months or so. But I would, from a recruiting standpoint, Iowa has actually been pretty good, especially considering what unfolded last summer, and that. For them, it's all about getting guys on campus too, and they haven't been able to do that now for more than a year. They finally get to in June. I know they're really looking forward to that because, I'm getting to travel. I grew up in Iowa City, so I know I'm biased, but it's just to me, it's just a fantastic college town. I mean, I love Madison, Wisconsin is right there with Iowa City to me, and a couple others as well. And State College, I love. I mean, Columbus is like unbelievable for for athletics, but I think Iowa City holds its own. But you kind of got to get guys here if they're not from the state of Iowa to buy into that, and so that'll be critical. So we'll see what kind of momentum they can get out of those June visits. But the program, I think, has done a really good job, kind of hanging on to guys. You really haven't seen too many transfers at all from a year ago. And I think that's also another good sign recruiting wise and for the program.
Well, it is not just you. I will vouch for Iowa City as well. That is one of my favorite Big Ten road trips. It is, I think everyone just hears Iowa and goes, oh, like Field of Dreams. And there's just like a farmhouse and a bunch of corn. And it's like, no. It's actually a really nice city, a very nice college town, like just really, really fantastic. And like the game atmosphere there. If you were an Ohio State fan who remembers 2017, like if you were not watching between your fingers with blood coming out of your ears, like that was a heck of a game atmosphere there. That place gets rocking at nighttime. So it is. I'm sure that is a place that you get someone on campus for a visit that goes a long way towards landing their signature. So can you really just let people know where they can find you on Twitter and where they can read your work?
Yeah, at Chad Leistikow. It's Leistikow on Twitter. And then the easiest way to find my work is simply hawkcentral.com. That captures all of our content with the Des Moines Register, Iowa City Press Citizen, and all our other sites actually in Gannett. So that's it.
All right, great. Really appreciate your time. Appreciate your time, Chad. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it.
Thanks again to Chad for joining me today and filling everyone in on the Iowa Hawkeyes. And thank you all for listening. I hope you guys are enjoying this preseason series on the other teams in the Big Ten. We'll continue through that series. We're going to have Northwestern a little later on this week. We'll get to Wisconsin, and then we'll start plowing through the Ohio State schedule. That'll start with Minnesota. That'll be coming up, and we'll just kind of, I don't have a set schedule for these yet. We'll just kind of go through them as we have days when there isn't a whole bunch of breaking news. We'll start doing these as well because there's a lot to talk about. It is going to be a really interesting season this year with all this returning super seniors and a lot of more players coming back from last season. Plus all the transfer portal drama. You got new coaches, you got new quarterbacks, you got the top teams in the sport, a lot of them breaking in new quarterbacks. Like, this might be a little bit more of an unpredictable season than we've seen in a little while in college football. It should be a lot of fun. And one place that would be a lot of fun to watch it all happen is at BuckeyeScoop.com. We have our great team of insiders covering Ohio State athletics from just about every angle you can possibly imagine. You can find all of our great insight and analysis on our Ask the Insiders board. It is a fantastic community, very lively, vibrant community, active discussions all the time on all sorts of different topics. That's all at BuckeyeScoop.com. Also, make sure you check out all of our great podcasts. They're on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, SoundCloud, Spreaker, Spotify. Just search Buckeye Scoop to find all of those. You can subscribe right there and leave us a 5-star rating and review, which will help other folks find those shows as well. And finally, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That is where we put all of our video content. We put all our podcasts up there, but we also have Mark Givler had his Southern Swing videos that he put together last week and his trip down south. I'm sure we'll have more of those coming out later this week. Lots of great content from him on Ohio State commits, Ohio State targets, names to know, faces to know, highlights, you name it. It's all there. Interviews with players and coaches, youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button and it is all free. And then you'll just get notified every time we post a great new video. So you can make your life a little easier. Doesn't cost anything. Just youtube.com/Buckeye Scoop. That'll do it for today. Thank you guys all for joining us. Have a great day. We will talk to you tomorrow.